Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ventures podcast. Today's episode with Dr. Alexandra Sims is all about DAO. She wrote a 315-page PhD thesis last year. I will link to it in the show notes if you'd like some light reading, but it's a beautiful document that actually outlines the different types of DAOs, voting in DAOs, dispute resolution in DAOs, how to think about the actual formation, jurisdiction issues, etc., etc. And so I'm such a fan of this that I wrote up my own sort of reflections and notes of it. And then we were able to serendipitously get connected. And so to be able to have her on this show is something I'm pretty fired up about. So we get into lots of different aspects of DAOs, but specifically I'm just fascinated by the menu of options that are available for anyone who is starting or growing a DAO. And what's clear is that the earliest stages of how you set up your structure and your governance is absolutely critical for the success of your DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So we talk in depth about the different types of voting, when you would want to use the different types of voting in your DAO, and more. So if you are watching this episode, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. If you just search for Ventures, it should show up. And if you're listening, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com. There I'll have more extensive show notes. We have a lot of different citations from the conversation today. As you can imagine, a couple of academics here nerding out about DAOs. I will put those in the show notes. And so with that, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Alexandra Sims. All right, Alex, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Will. No, it's great to be here.
So I couldn't be more delighted and excited to have you on this show, because when I was referred to your PhD thesis on DAOs over the holidays, and shot it over to my Kindle, curled up next to the fire, and just absolutely enjoyed reading all 315 pages of it. Because I've spent my life, especially the last 12 years, investing in entrepreneurs and investing in the process of building ventures. And the excitement around DAOs right now, there's not a lot of great literature out there, especially at the level of your PhD thesis. So the opportunity to speak with you today is just enormously exciting. So thank you. Would you mind just starting? Just tell us a little bit about your journey thus far.
Right, I won't go on for too long. I've been an academic for over 20 years, so quite a long time. And my background is in copyright and consumer protection and a whole lot of different things. And 2016, I listened to lots of podcasts and read a lot, and I came across two podcasts that had lined up back to back, and they were both on blockchain and Ethereum and smart contracts. Mm-hmm. And I knew about Bitcoin, but I thought, this is weird internet money. And then when I listened to these things, my brain just sort of melted down, exploded, whatever, and I just thought, it's going to change everything. And I was working with someone, and we were going to putting in a grant proposal to get a grant on digital money and mobile payments. And I said, no, mobile payments, that's boring. We've got to look at cryptocurrencies and regulation. And I knew nothing about blockchain. I knew nothing about banking and finance, but I was willing to learn, and I got a grant based on my previous work. And also, part of those podcasts, one of them was basically advertising a conference that was coming up in 2 days' time. So I sort of begged my associate dean, please have the money to go. And so I just fell down the rabbit hole, as quite a few people have done. So, and then I did stuff on regulating cryptocurrencies from the law and also the banking and finance side. And then I thought, well, I really need a PhD. So when I started in law, it wasn't very common in New Zealand to have PhDs in law. So I didn't get one and didn't have one, but I thought, well, I really should have one, because it's sort of embarrassing when you've got very, very junior people who go, you haven't got a PhD, and they're sort of shocked. So anyway, I did it. And then I contacted someone I knew for years, and I said, well, want to do, blockchain. He said, well, it's very broad. And so we thought DAOs. And of course,
Ah,
when we were talking about this, 2017, so it was sort of the aftermath of the DAO.
right, right.
And, and so that's what we decided to go with. Plus, I'd had a lot of sort of teaching and other experience within organizations. So I've been on lots of boards, teaching, different business structures and things like that. So it was a way of sort of crystallizing and focusing on it. But also I wasn't just wanting to look at the legal side because it's a bit boring. And DAOs are a lot bigger than that.
Yes.
And part of what the PhD was actually trying to explain these things, because you're trying to talk with regulators, you're trying to talk with lawyers, what are they?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, as you know, there's lots and lots of misinformation about DAOs. So, and people have just got, often completely the wrong idea. Even sort of basic things like the DAO.
Right.
A lot of people say that was the first DAO, when it wasn't.
Yeah, right.
And also, it's like the worst. No, I wasn't saying it's the worst type of thing, but we saw what happened because they couldn't change the rules at all, the code. So of course that imploded. So anyway, so that was the whole sort of bit of a long-winded way. That's how I sort of got into it. But my research on blockchain is a lot broader than just DAOs. So I'm looking at NFTs at the moment. And a whole lot of other things. So, but just DAOs is one of the things. But so I said, when I started thinking about it in 2017 and was drafting on my proposal, there was a good chance this whole thing could have died. DAOs wouldn't have been around.
Yeah.
And when I started, there was basically nothing on DAOs. There was virtually nothing. So it's been like, as I've been writing it, all this other literature and was popping up. And of course, what's happened in DAOs has just been phenomenal. It's amazing. But what I find particularly interesting is it's not people with setting up DAOs. It's not just the blockchain sort of faithful that are doing this. There's actually very large companies or civil society groups who are actually, instead of setting up your equivalent of an unincorporated society, they're actually wanting to set up as a DAO, which is quite remarkable. And also another quick thing, which I'm not sure if your listeners are aware, but end of last year in Australia, there was a parliamentary select committee who recommended that Australia change its corporations law or company law to recognise DAOs, which is a phenomenal sort of thing to do.
Wow.
But what was even more interesting was I was in a meeting with people from Australia about DAOs, other academics, and there was someone there who was saying, well, this has been the recommendation, but of course the government or the parliament's free just to turn around and say, no, we're not going to do anything. And he said, this will happen. There's no way they're going to do this. This is just some, they did it. And then it came through in the meeting. He was obviously checking his emails that actually, yes, they'd taken it up. So he was flabbergasted. So even big proponents of DAOs, it's remarkable. But saying that, I'm worried because there's lots of hype around DAOs, and everyone wants to set up a DAO, but most of them are not DAOs at all. Or when I talk to people about setting them up, people in business and stuff, more traditional ones, when I explain what it involves, they then say, okay, you mean we can't control it anymore? You mean, and then so they go very quiet and say, well, maybe we could sort of start small here and then over time maybe decentralize. So, but you probably found that as well in your travels in the DAO world.
Well, I actually loved how you framed it because I hadn't found that anywhere else in the literature. Not that the quote unquote literature is very deep or I'm very familiar with it, but I come from an academic background. I spent 10 years in a bioengineering lab. So reading a paper with citations was a breath of fresh air in this space. But I love how you articulated the difference between a proto-DAO, a pseudo-DAO, and a DAO. Can you actually talk a little bit more about that for those who are listening in who are just like, what? I don't know what is a DAO, to the people who think they know what a DAO is, but maybe don't understand your distinction. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, sure. This is just my distinction.
Sure.
I've described like Bitcoin and Ethereum as proto-DAOs. So, I mean, Bitcoin's the easy one because it's almost impossible to change the rules. Okay, so we saw that over SegWit and all those types of things, huge arguments. So it's very, very difficult. Ethereum is getting more towards a DAO, but it's really not very transparent about how the rules can change. And Vitalik has written a lot about the off-chain governance, and so it's getting there. Then the pseudo-DAOs, when people call it a DAO, and it's not. I mean, I saw one recently, the Astrange DAO. Have you heard about that?
I haven't.
There's thousands of DAOs now. It's been set up to help Astrange, what's his first name?
Julian,
yeah,
yes.
Julian Assange, to help with legal fees and things. So, I mean, it's good, but the family has the final say on whatever happens. So that's not
that is a good example of a pseudo DAO. Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, when I was interviewing people for my thesis, and 3 of them, I had to exclude the interviews because it turned out very quickly that while they'd called it a DAO, it wasn't a DAO at all. Because it was like one of them actually wasn't even using a blockchain. Yeah, but that happens anyway. I mean, there's been lots of, something like OneCoin. Have you come across OneCoin?
I've heard of it. I don't know too much about it though.
No, well, it's not even a blockchain at all. It's not a cryptocurrency, but they're using cryptocurrency. So it's a big scammer. I'll send you through a link later because the BBC have done a really good podcast series on it. So it's well worth listening to. And the thing is, I'd never heard about it because people that are in blockchain won't have heard about it because it's not a blockchain. It's just a just a scammer. And in the end, I think a couple of people are in prison, but they made hundreds of millions of dollars.
I think I saw some things on Twitter about that. Yeah. So specifically then for people that are curious about the identifying pseudo DAOs, like what are the things to look out for? Which I guess I want to be more nuanced with this question because a lot of, I think, well-intended groups are maybe in the proto-DAO category and are like going through progressive decentralization. So I guess it's a 2-part question. What is the right way to go through progressive decentralization to a full-on DAO, or at least ways that you might recommend or people to look into? And then what would be the things for people to look out for to recognize where a group is along that spectrum?
Okay, I'll start with the second one because that's the easiest one.
Sure.
But easier. Look at how the decisions are made. So, I mean, the easy one is when it's sort of all on-chain voting. Something that it's not necessarily all the token holders because, DAOs, you have governance tokens and other types of things. I mean, you don't have to have just the one token. Even if you've got a sort of a smaller subset, like Polkadot has its council and things like that, that's still fine. I mean, so there may be a smaller one. So this, it's along a continuum from centralized to fully decentralized, and it doesn't have to be fully decentralized to be a DAO. And the reason for that is because voter apathy. If you really want to make, and also if you want every single thing to be voted on, it's not going to work. So it is complicated. But I mean, at the end of the day, especially with that Assange one, so if someone has got the final veto, well, then that's no way there's a DAO. Yeah. So it is difficult. I mean, and it can be difficult. So getting on Discord, whatever channels they use, just to see that. So it isn't that easy. And again, just because it says DAO, it's not the case at all. So it's almost like that definition of pornography. You know it when you see it.
When you see it, yeah.
Yeah. Coming back to that point about what do you do? How do you get to a DAO? Well, that's the almost $1 billion question, okay? Because everyone's grappling with that. So what do you do? But the worry for me, I think other people, is that if you've got no money, if there's no money involved, it's fine. Okay, you can make decisions, but as soon as a whole lot of money gets involved, there's vested interests, and people don't want to to do anything, to give potentially give anything up. And that's sort of also my worry with VCs coming in, because if they're investing, they want a return, so they're unlikely to, there may be the roadmap, maybe to do something, but that doesn't come off for whatever reason. So it is difficult. I mean, some people are thinking, setting up LLCs, setting up a limited liability company in New Zealand. They're two different things. And I quite like Dash, because Dash has got a trust structure and a whole lot of different things to try to, not concentrate the ownership, and trying to protect everybody from everybody else. There's also the thing with the not just the founders, but the individual participants, the DAO members, is liability. So, if something goes wrong, are you personally liable? So there's that as well. So you've got a whole lot of different things going on, which I try to do in the thesis.
Yeah, your thesis was definitely loud and clear that unless you do something, the default is going to be a partnership where everybody involved is liable. So you had a number of great recommendations for how to go about doing it, which almost a year later now I think is still pretty true, right? Or how would you update maybe the overall recommendation that you had in your thesis now, what, 9-10 months later?
I wouldn't change that particularly. I don't think there's been any real movements in legal structures.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I would do if I was doing it would be having a whole lot more, how these things work, because it's just been a massive explosion. There's a lot more sophistication now about voting, which there wasn't really at the time. And it's just sort of mind-boggling what's occurring, and the creativity and the inventiveness. But also, the problem with DAOs is they're so broad. So, there could be a VC fund. That was the classic case of the DAO, and quite a few of them are still like that. But also, it's the ability to, use them for community efforts and organising, which is really, really interesting. I think that's more the future. And again, we said this, but when you have a whole lot of money involved, it distorts things, which is not ideal.
Yeah. So how, basically, since last year, when I in haste started studying, started figuring out, because what I do for a living is I run a group that invests in startups with more than just money, right? Our capital division is just one part. We also invest our time and our collective network of people that bring their expertise and their heart and their passion and their calendar and their checkbook to surround a founder about how to bring a venture to life. And then we have a services division that will run professional services for a portfolio and some of our larger clients. And so I've been very interested in, when is the point, and for what types of ventures do I recommend a founder go down the path of creating a DAO versus a traditional C Corp. And it's been, because it's so early and so hard to communicate, a lot of the founders we've worked with have said, oh, I'm just going to start with the C Corp. Or some start with the LLC and then convert to C Corp as soon as they raise money. And then maybe figure out how to decentralize and DAO it down the road.
Yes, but, I mean, yes.
Yeah, but and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, but what we've done is in order for me to adequately advise the founders that we work with, I needed to do it myself. And so back in September, I basically realized there's all these learn Web3 resources out there. Basically, all of them are geared towards software engineers, teaching them Solidity, teaching them how different smart contract platforms in order to build on Web3. A lot of those are pumped by the chains themselves to try to recruit developers to build their decentralized apps on their chains, which is fine. Like, I totally get that. I actually think it's great. A lot of activity. But what's missing is that there aren't a lot of resources to help train product people in Web3, to train existing Web2 product managers to learn how to design and architect and manage and run a project that's building a product. And I think because it's been mostly engineers, there are some great product engineers, so I don't want to be overly sweeping with my comment, but because it's been mostly engineers, that is why the UX, that is why the experience of a lot of these products are suboptimal, and it's so confusing for people to get into Web3, which is, it's almost like the NFT wave the last year was inevitable because the world was ready for something. Like, just give me a Bored Ape. I understand Bored Ape art, although that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down later. So what we ended up doing is we created a cohort of people that said, yes, we want to help train Web3 product managers. We started a DAO, and what we have defined by that is actually a sequence of decentralization, where we're using this tool called Coordinate to give each other, have this giving economy set up, where you're giving your effort and your expertise in exchange. You're giving these give tokens. And then we summoned a DAO on DAO House on Gnosis chain, where the mirror of the giving of the give tokens goes to our governance token, which on DAO House they call them sort of shares and loot, which we are referring to as our governance token and our treasury token. So now we have a Discord server, we have a Coordinate over here, which is not on chain, right? This is an off-chain way of just giving each other these tokens. Those tokens then get on chain, on Gnosis chain. And then we are collectively first going to throw this event on April 29th to train developers, train developers who can become product people, right? We're training them to become Web3 product managers. And then there's going to be a sequence of products and services after that we're collectively going to figure out what to do. And the reason why we chose DAO House for Moloch style DAOs, I'll refer people into your thesis for why that's important. But I actually love the idea of getting people together to do something good for humanity that wasn't pump and dump, right? These are not transferable shares right out of the gate. We wanted people to come in to learn Web3, to train up to be product managers. And we've just been advised by legal counsel that this is rapidly evolving, and there will be clarity down the road, or at least some degree of risk by which we can collectively make a decision about how to organize ourselves. That's what we've been doing, and it's been fascinating to get hundreds of people now that are coordinating compensation, coordinating projects to work on, recruiting people in. But like your thesis claimed or wrote about, there's lots of different types of ways to do that. What do you think even about, and Banyan, by the way, is the tree that plants other trees and becomes this big organism, which I actually love the organic nature of the name, because it will sort of fit into what we're doing at helping other people start DAOs and do things in Web3. Okay, I just said a lot, but I'm curious from your perspective how you would weave in your expertise or thoughts around even just the way that we did that.
No, and I listened to a podcast a few weeks ago on the BanyanDAO, which was really interesting. So, but that's a really good example of bringing people together. Also, the incentivizing of people as well, and rewarding people. But see, I think that is very different to what a lot of people want to do. Is they want to be a founder, they want to make a whole lot of money, and so all these DAOs are really sort of I'll use a DAO, but it's different, because when people are coming in and working they should get ownership. So some DAOs plus the ability to governing, which is completely different from a normal, lot of other company and other entities where people are just coming in and doing some freelance work. You pay them the gig economy and leaving. So do you want to harness the power of the community? And if you want to really want to harness the power of the community, then I think DAOs and community can be small. It doesn't have to be thousands of people. It can be 20 people type of thing. But it does mean setting up a DAO, if it's running properly, it does mean you lose control. Yeah? You're one of many. And so that's the mind shift that people
by
have
design,
to get around. And that's why I said at the beginning, you talk with these people and they go, we want to decentralized DAO. And when you explain it, they go, that's not quite what we had in mind. So, and it just depends. But I do think there's so much hype around them. So there's no there's no model DAO, there's no one size fits all. It very much depends. And I think if people are wanting to do this is do what you do what I do, and just read and listen.
Just read.
Well, I tend to listen more actually. But
get a PhD with a lot of beautiful citations, and I love your whole section on dispute resolution. That opened up a whole world I hadn't even really been thinking about before. But I think besides all the pump and dump, which let them do their thing. So the people who are not thinking pump and dump with DAOs, the people who are actually excited about harnessing like you said, harnessing the power of the community. Obviously, I'm experimenting. Those of us in BanyanDAO are experimenting. There's lots of other great DAOs out there that are doing a lot of amazing work. But a lot of the tweet threads I'm seeing, things tucked into Discords, it all comes back to how are we collectively going to get things done? And a lot of DAOs default back to corporate structures and committees and boards and executives and just basically replicate a C Corp because that's what everybody knows. How do you see DAOs being able to, like, is it possible to collect? Is it possible to pull this off? I guess is what I'm asking. Is it possible to get all that passion and energy in a community to do something, to build something amazing, do something great? Or is this a pipe dream?
No, that's a very good question. I'll backtrack a little bit. With DAOs and people initially, I shouldn't say this anyway, often the young men think, oh, we've got these tools, we can do whatever we want. But you come back to it's people, okay? And people for thousands of years have struggled with how do we organize, how do we make decisions? Yep. And it doesn't change that, but it does. If you use blockchain cleverly, then you can do something we haven't done before. So it is possible, I think, that you can actually organize people, you can get better decision making, but it requires a lot of careful forethought this is the thing, of setting it up, but then it is impossible when you're setting something up to think, right, we've catered for all the different permutations. So, and that's what, we saw that with the DAO, okay? So set up, something's gone wrong, it imploded. So, but then you also need to be able to change that in real time, basically. So this isn't working, we have to change, and we will go that way. And this is why, as I said, if there's too much money riding on it, then people won't want to change. But there's been lots of decentralized organizations that have run quite well, but they do tend to be smaller, and they've used online tools like Lumino. We've got Inspiral, which is a decentralized organization in New Zealand. So it can work, but I think that people, they think it's too easy. They just think, well, yes, people will vote. You've got a problem with, of course, is it one token, one vote? And you've got whales coming in and stuffing it up. If it's one person, one vote, you've then got civil attack, because who do you you could just spin up a whole lot of identity. So it is really, really, really complicated. Yeah. And so and I'm not sort of giving any firm answers, but the best thing again is to see. And so you can go, oh, yeah, that's good from that one. We'll think about that, and we might bring this other thing in. People are doing very creative voting schemes. So, conviction voting, quadratic voting. It's just, it's very, very new. But saying that, there's lots and lots of, not just literature, but lived experience of different organizations, and people just need to, and not just read stuff about, from those people, but it's so there's different disciplines. There's political economy, all those different ones of just looking. And what I try to do in the thesis is to bring that all together. And in fact, because I talk, talked to a lot of people, I've spoken with people in political science, and they, for example, never heard of quadratic voting, whereas quadratic voting was designed for what they're doing. So it's just real world. And to be honest, with some of the people that are setting up DAOs, they have no practical experience, no knowledge.
Yes,
really.
We're seeing that a lot. If you haven't run a large or at least even a small group of people and had to deal with jurisdiction issues, deal with all the different professional services, deal with management structures, management theory, organizational theory, it might be a good idea to bring some people in who have been around a few blocks to at least be a sounding board to help you to that end. So would you mind actually, because people may not know what quadratic voting you actually have a beautiful section in your thesis where you if I recall, you talk about liquid democracy, different types of voting mechanisms, the perils of one vote, one person, i.e. Sybil attacks, conviction voting. Would you mind just giving us a bit of a lecture or a 101 for those that aren't familiar with these terms?
Okay, sorry, I'll try to be brief.
Sure, no problem.
So quadratic voting was designed, it said, for democracy. So say, for example, at the moment, the minority in a country can only get something that benefits it if the majority sort of is in favour of it. And so you may have really strong preferences for something. Say, for example, in gay marriage, for example, you really, really want that, and the rest of people, they don't really care one way or the other. But what you can do, depending how you set it up, you can also use this for funding of projects, which I'll get into in a second. So say you're given 5 votes for a certain time period, and there's a whole lot of different, say, proposals or potential laws that come up, and it might even be the parliamentarians or the Congress people. And what you do is you've got 5 votes, and you could put 1 vote on each of 5 different bills or proposals, which is worth 1. Or you could, if you put 2 as quadratic, so that's worth 4. But if you put all 5 of it on one thing, that's 25. So what you can do is you indicate your preferences. So if you've got you may have only a few people, say, or even if you're one person and there's 100 other people, if you're really, really invested in something, well, it doesn't work that way, does it? Anyway, it works, okay? Because because people can be, I'm not explaining myself very well, just the power of 25 versus 5. And they use that in practical example in Colorado House of Representatives. When the Democrats got in, there was a whole lot of bills, and if they'd all been passed, they were going to cost $100 million to do, but they only had, say, 40 million. So they couldn't do all of them. And then there was a whole lot of people's horse trading. Well, if you vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill type of thing. So they used quadratic voting there. They gave everyone, I don't think it was 5 votes, and then they could then put it on what they thought. So they could split them up, or they could, do whatever multiples. And from that, it was very quickly, the strong preferences, it was easy. These ones are going to be funded and passed. These ones won't. So there's that. A similar thing is with conviction voting. And this was designed specially for DAOs or blockchain. And I think they Common Stack use it. And this is a way, it's more complicated. Again, with that, whales, okay? We don't want whales coming in and skewing the vote. And so what you can do is, and also with time, so that quadratic voting doesn't matter when you voted, but with the conviction voting, if you vote for different options, for example, different proposals that you want the DAO to fund, you can split it up however you want, and the longer that you leave your vote in, the stronger the vote is. It's a very complicated thing. But if you suddenly decide, oh, I don't like this, and you move your votes just before the voting period, it's accrued a whole lot of weight from where it was, and even if, which remains, and there is a decay function, but it's quite slow. So if you put it in just before the vote into something else, it will not have the same weight of votes on it. And what this is designed to do is to stop a whale from coming along at the last minute and dumping everything to skew it, because a whole lot of little people, their votes will really compound during that time period. So it's just a way of stopping whales, and again, for people to strongly express what they want to be funded, but without putting all of your your votes in one particular one. The one with the one person, one vote, so one token, one vote, that comes back to if you've got a whole lot of tokens in it, you have a disproportionate say in the decisions, which is what we have in corporations and other things, and that's not particularly fair. But also, what I think most people forget is that we have different voting structures in different organizations. So when it comes to you voting for, I don't know, who's the next president, you've got one, you could be a billionaire, but you've only got one vote.
Yeah.
In theory, and you can lobby, but anyway. Co-ops, those types of things. It's one member, one vote. And yet when it comes to corporations, it's not. It's whatever your shareholding is. And coming back to civil attacks, that was the bit where we could say, right, every member will have one vote, but then unless you're doing KYC, know your customer, anti-money laundering, you don't know. Someone could just create a whole lot of wallets and they're controlling them. You do that. We've seen in real life that not everybody votes, and that's happened with blockchain. And in fact, the first DAO, which I think it's the first DAO, it's the first one I could find in my research, was BitShares. So Dan Larimer, who
of course,
EOS,
EOS, and
he did it. He had it. No one voted. Hardly anyone voted. Plus, again, there was a whole lot of money involved, so no one wanted to okay anything for any work to be done. I mean, few people would. So they ended up having what we call proxies. So 12 people made the decisions on behalf of everybody else. And so that's a problem with the apathy. So, I mean, these are not new problems at all.
Right.
But things like conviction voting and quadratic voting are new. So, and people are playing with them and doing all sorts of different things. You can also have councils, as I said before, who Polkadot, they can introduce, the council members can introduce their own one, and then other people can do it. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. So it's like, what do you want? Type of thing.
So then, okay, I really appreciate that overview. That's between the one person, one vote, the one token, one vote, the delegated, the quadratic, the conviction. If that's a good sort of summary of the spectrum of the types of votes. If you were to, or did I miss something in there?
Oh, no, sorry, just on that though, we were talking before about governance tokens. So you could just have a particular token, as you know, for voting. So the DAO might have 2 or 3 or more tokens, and a good example of that is DAI, MakerDAO, so the stable coin. So if you've got DAI, that's a token, but if you want to be part of the governance, you have the I've forgotten the name, NKR, the governance
Maker,
token. Maker, sorry.
That's right. Okay, so even then, right, because we have in BanyanDAO we have a treasury token, we have a governance token. We will probably have NFTs. That's a whole nother story, which can do all kinds of interesting things. And so, okay, given all the types of tokens and the types of voting, if you were to start a DAO that, and I know there's lots of different, from nation state to a pizza parlor, right? But if you were to start a DAO that, let's say, was trying to build a product, to build something for the world, how would you do it? What based on all this menu of things? I know you have to maybe go down some hypotheticals here, but based on all your research, like, how would you think about architecting it?
You obviously got money involved, okay? So it's not so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I quite like the idea of having councils, partly because if you haven't got that sort of expertise for actually reviewing things.
Yeah.
Also having like a technical committee or something that can make very quick, if there's obviously an error in the code and there's problems, that they can come in and make the changes. Because if someone has to put up a proposal that people have to vote upon and you're being attacked, that's naive. That's naive. And then to think, well, we'll design it so that it's foolproof. Well, no, that doesn't happen at all. So that's sort of the way I would go. If you are somebody that wants to be in a completely decentralized DAO, and so you're not happy with some having a council, then that's obviously not the DAO for you. But also, what I quite like is those councils where you can remove council members. Okay, so it's not replicating exactly what we had before. Is that you don't have to wait till the end of their term. They can be removed basically in a stage if you have enough people behind it. And also you can have a thing where the council might make a decision, but then that could be overridden by the token holders, but voting at a much higher majority.
Yeah.
So which is another way of doing it. Some of the DAOs really want to be more consensus. So if anything is going to be done, rather than just having that almost binary 50 above 50 to make decisions, 80-20. So you're only doing things if most people want it. But also actually just on this about the product, if you actually want to ship something, if you actually want to do something, then again, having everything voted on is just not workable. So you've got to give people domains of expertise, and they make the decisions within that, up to a certain point. And that's I would do something like that, which is not new. This is what other people are doing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use what is it? Oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of it. But, yeah.
So the committees or the teams is also where my brain has gone as we're a few months into this experiment with BanyanDAO. And I keep coming back to how do the people get elected? Like who gets to decide who gets to be on those teams? And my thought is it should be the teams that decide and have some kind of voting within the teams. So that's why setting it up from the start is so important, right? There needs to be people that set up the structure, set up the protocols, set up the tools, and set up the systems and set up the teams such that you can add more, almost like a constitution of a nation state or something, right?
Yeah.
And that can be amended, that can be changed, and there's different branches of government. But what I'm fascinated about, because a lot of the literature is for DAOs, assuming you already have $1 billion and thousands and thousands of people in them. What I'm interested in about is the architecture at the earliest stages. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to set up protocols to enable this to become a huge international multi-trillion-dollar DAO that's doing all kinds of good for humanity, right? Like that's the vision for what we're trying to do. And from the very beginning, when my brain also goes to teams, I'm thinking about, do we elect leaders of those teams, or do we maybe do teams of 9? What would the election process look like? What would removing people look like? if you were to sort of help guide us and collective people who are also asking the beginning of DAO conversation, how would you functionally set up operationally those teams and get people in and out of them?
Well, I would look at what other decentralized organizations, sort of civil society, what they've been doing
Mm,
and what works. So not blockchain, because a lot of the stuff's not new,
yeah,
and see what they do there, because they
yeah,
have a but also I think from memory in BanyanDAO, or might be other ones with reputation. So the people that are doing the work, they can have a better say in what people are doing. Yeah, so I can't give you a firm answer, but holocracy. Have you looked at that?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Because that's sort of a team type of thing. There's decision making there, and
right,
they then go and talk to other teams as well.
right,
So that was reinventing organizations. It's not that old, because this is the thing, is that people have been trying for years to be able to do things. And I think, was it Zappo, the shoe company, was using holocracy, but then they walked back from that. So it's just looking at different models of what people are doing. I can't give you advice.
yeah. Well, we're in the pioneer, we're in the exploratory phases and trying to kind of learn from everybody. So I think it's going to be some balance between making sure that the people who are working on these teams have done a certain amount of self-assessment, have gone through the ikigai, what are you passionate about, what are you experienced and qualified for, what can you be paid money for, and what does the DAO actually need, right? The overlapping quadrant of those four, and then some efficient way to give those teams the ability to quickly move in the way that they need to, but also allow them to be removed quickly. So it's almost like replicating traditional, republic democracies, or there's a lot of good examples and bad examples out there, but where you have elections but then the people can be kicked out by certain people in the judicial system. So it's almost like you're going to have to replicate an executive, a congressional, and a judicial system one way or another as you scale, but hopefully do it way more efficiently than a lot of the nation states that are just mired in gridlock. Do you have any sort of thoughts around that in the earliest stages, or even principles by which the people listening into this, who are the entrepreneurs thinking about building DAOs, or currently in the earliest stages, what would be principles to guide us?
Well, I think what you're saying about replicating what we currently have seems intuitive. I mean, why bother having this new structure? Again, I think it's people mindset needs to change. So again, go back and look. It won't be something that they're familiar with, but these other groups, they're very good at, often it's miscommunication. So one person thinks they're doing something and they don't know how everyone is perceived. So they have meetings, there's self-reflection, and people will, just those interpersonal skills. But also it's who you get in is vital. And so it's doing a whole lot of screening, being a big gatekeeper to let people in. So because once someone's in, it's very difficult. They can be highly disruptive. And that's another sort of common misconception about DAOs, is that blockchain, permissionless, anyone can come in type of thing. But that doesn't mean to say all DAOs are like that. And I think from what you want is you've got to be really careful of who you have, because it's like you if someone's got passion, that's what the main thing. You can teach them skills, but that would be do they get it? Do they sort of understand it? And then you can train them. You don't want someone coming in with the technical skills who just doesn't understand it. I mean, a number of years ago, I was talking to someone from let's say a large company, very large company, infrastructure company,
Sure.
who had been technical skills, but they'd been brought in to design, to work on a blockchain for it to work. And he was the biggest blockchain skeptic in the world. And I was just thinking, well, that project's going to fail, isn't it? Because, it was just bizarre behavior. So it's it's completely different. So the people I would have involved are like community organizers, and you also want that balance within the group. I'll give you, risk of running out of time, I'll give you a quick, you may have heard this before, a quick example. Still with chickens, but it applies to people. They had a real life experiment. 2 lots of chickens. One lot of chickens was, they're laying eggs, that was the main sort of output. And they bred only from the best chicken layers, okay? And so they culled all the ones that weren't very good at laying chickens. The other lot, they were the good, bad, and the ugly, and they were just allowed to continue. So some were really good and other ones weren't very good at laying. But 8 generations later, they looked at them, and the ones that, the super chicken layers, I think there was only about 1 or 2 alive, whereas the other ones were still fine. And the reason for that is the super chicken layers are the ones that are grabbing all the resources and just being very, very aggressive, whereas the other ones are sort of self-regulated. And it's like with teams. And in fact, the person who did this goes and gives talks, and when he has bits of chickens, people come up after and says, "I know that chicken." So it's that team building. You've all the time has to go into that team building, and that's not organic. People actually, you were saying before, the tests and things. You can do all of that and slotting people in. And so there's a nice sort of equilibrium amongst the team. And in fact, I'm at university, and students don't like group work at all. Okay, they just hate it. But for one of the courses, they use, it takes a long time. They've got to do questionnaires and things, and then they are all put together. And the people come back, the students go, "Oh my God, it worked amazing. I've never had this in my whole time." And it's because it's been engineered from the start. So that's maybe something for everyone to look at.
That's good. That's good. Okay. So we are at time. Really appreciate this conversation. Any final words, anything that's on your mind now as it relates to this space that you'd like to tell the audience?
Well, it's exciting. Okay. There's very, very bright people involved. And it's just so much experimentation, which is really good. Just, I guess one thing, go on forever, but I won't, is that it's not all about, the online world, like you're saying, shipping a product, but also people are using it to, for example, to coordinate natural resources. So there's a good paper, I can give you the link to the show notes, of water rights. Now you've got a whole lot of vested interests. How do we do this? So just a different way of governance. So a DAO is multi-purpose vehicle. We don't know where it's going to go, but there's these underlying issues, which, as I said, the technology doesn't solve. I think I've got a quote in my thesis, not mine, a quote from someone else that says we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So,
that's good.
So they've got, the technology can't overcome that. So it's designing things to take into account that. And I do think we have got medieval institutions at the moment with companies and other things, but DAOs can sort of, I think, transcend that.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Great. All right. Well, where can people find you online if they want to continue the conversation with you, or what's the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn's quite good.
Okay.
I've got Twitter. I can, if you want, I can send you the links.
Great. I will put those in the show notes. Alex, this has been incredibly informative. I look forward to hopefully getting you back on the show as we get questions in. Again, thank you for taking the time, not only for this conversation, but for what you did with your PhD thesis to lay very important work for the rest of us moving forward here. Really appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me. And it's great that someone actually reads my work.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Prota Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.